Today we're going to be starting a new sculpture, and I think I'm going to be building it with terracotta. I do have plasticine clay, but I decided that I'm going to use up my terracotta sculpture or terracotta clay that I have here. This clay, I like plasticine, but it's not the best sort of clay, and since I have a bag left over, I think I'm just going to go ahead and use this clay. I found a couple places online that you can use for reference as a sculptor and artist. One of the websites I am looking at is female-anatomyforartists.com, and they have a couple free sets. This is one of the sets. If I click on it, I like this pose. The good thing about this particular pose is that I don't need an armature. I can just build it with terracotta. And if you go around the photos, you can see various vantage points. The only thing is that these photos are very flat here in the light and you can't see a lot of detail, but they do have quite a few of these photos that you can use for reference. The other website is called artmodels360.com, and I like this. This is a very artistic pose, so I might do this. Again, you don't need an armature for this. The only thing that you might need is for the arms. So this one might be better as a plasticine model. And also when you're casting this and you're making a mold of this, the arms sticking out like that are going to be a bit of an issue. The way I like to work is by having a screen in front of me, and you can see I have my sculpture up or my reference up, and I have my clay and everything all ready to go. So it is important to kind of look at the sculpture and see what we need. First, we're going to need a platform to put the figure in, and this one I'm not going to build an armature, I don't think. Since I'm building it with terracotta, you can even use some skewers to hold the sculpture up as you're sculpting. But this is going to be a quick sketch, so hopefully it's going to end up working. I've always liked the way that water-based clay works for quick sculptures. That's the reason I'm using this. With the other stuff, you have to warm it up. This one, you just have to get it wet. Where the toes are going to be, and I'm going to make it straight this way, so her knees are going to be hitting here, so the torso is going to be sitting up from here. One of the things I really admire about water-based clay is how fluid it is, and if you have it moist, it's so easy to handle. I do get my studio a little bit dirty with this clay, and I prefer the oil-based clay for projects that take a long time. But since this is a very quick sketch, and I like water-based clay so much, it's very fun to use it, and it feels almost like you're painting instead of sculpting. Right here I'm dividing both the feet, and I put a little bit more clay in the lower legs because I need the support. And now we have to start making the hips. And if you divide half the figure right down the middle, you can work on the proportions a little bit easier. So here I am just dividing the lower leg to the upper leg, but I'm concentrating mostly on the lower bottom of the figure. Also, it's very important to have your model move around. One of the issues I've seen people do, including me, is that you have the model stand in one position and you work that position for a good 40 minutes. In the beginning, you have to move the model around and really look carefully everywhere, because you can neglect an item I mean like our leg or our thigh, and it just doesn't look good. I've seen schools of sculpture that basically they work on a profile only, and I think that's a little bit of a mistake. I think if you're a sculptor, you really need to learn anatomy. It's not like painting where you can concentrate on the surface and get a great painting. You have to understand what's underneath the muscles, the skin, the fat. I think that will create a better sculpture. Knowing anatomy is probably the most important thing you can do as a sculptor. At this point, I'm going to add the head. Not so much because I want to sculpt the head so quickly. It's just I need to see where the trapezius and the clavicle are, just for proportion's sake. Here I am just making some measurements where I think the rib cage is going to be. The 10th rib pokes out a little bit, even in our model. It stands out and you can see where the light hits it. And I'm going to go back to my lower legs. Oftentimes I bounce around the sculpture. I don't stick to one place too long, because one thing that could happen is that you focus on something for a very long time and then it's all wrong and you have to move everything again. So here we are. This is the initial gesture. It's important to move around the sculpture and just see the parts that I'm missing. I am missing a lot of chunky here. And when I am looking at the gesture of the sculpture, she's leaning a little bit this way and her torso is going this way, but her hips are almost steady. But if you move the torso or the shoulders one way and the hips one way, it gives it a little bit more interest. So I think I'm going to do that. One of the things that happens is that as you're working from one side, say the profile, you neglect the thickness of the muscles in the back. When you look at the muscles, a model like this, her muscles are very prominent. And a lot of people forget that, even though a lot of people concentrate on female sculptures, paintings, and drawings, because there's much more of an abundance with female models than there are male models. But I believe that male models are much better to learn anatomy and for expression. I think there's a lot of people that just want to look at nude females, and it's very important early on to use male models instead, because you can learn a lot more from anatomy from a male model. Some definition to the head. One of the things I do is box in the head. I just want to show the front, the sides, the top, and the back as a box. I don't sculpt a perfect box, but I think I want to show the direction of where the head is. And in my reference, the head is not looking up quite as much, but in a way, I do like the pose of the sculpture looking up a lot more. And I do not really go by the reference alone. I have something in mind in this sculpture that I want to do. And for me, I'm just using the reference as something to look at, but I am not interested in copying it exactly the way it is. There's always room for improvement. And one of the things I found throughout the years is that some people try to copy everything exactly, and I've done that in the past, but I prefer making things up slightly and having my own reference in there. I believe I need to make it a little bit more massive. Right now she almost looks cartoonish with a very slight waist, and people don't have those slight waists as much as we like to think. They're a little bit fuller. Even though I do like the shape, I'm going to thicken it up slightly. Our model is not exactly full-chested, so I wanted to make it just a little bit more prominent. And I do like the athletic build in models because you can see a lot more of the rib cage. Near the clavicle here and the sternum, it's a lot flatter, and if you touch your own chest, you'll just most likely feel the bone there. And what I had was a little bit too much mass there. And you're constantly dividing things up, and then you have to add the pectoralis. So the female model does make adding the muscles a little bit more complex because female models are a lot more subtle. Back at the head, and I decided to add just some features, hollow out the eyes, put some of the lips, the nose. This gives me the direction of where she's looking. And of course, as you're looking up, and no matter how you twist the neck, the muscles, particularly the sternocleidomastoid, is going to be prominent. And that's a very good muscle. In the reference, you do see that sternocleidomastoid pop out quite a bit. At this point, let's start adding the arms. The arms are going to be tied to her back, even though in the reference, she has both hands clasping each other and she just has it in the back. I don't know. It's not that interesting of a pose. And I think what I want to tell you guys, you need to make your sculptures interesting. You know, add something that you want to say with a sculpture. For me, I'm going to put her arms backwards, but she's going to be bound. So this is going to be sort of a bondage sort of sculpture. It's a subject I've always been fascinated with, and I think it works pretty well with this sort of kneeling pose. This is my favorite scraper tool, and it's not so much about the scraping or the texture, it's that you can blend two forms together using this tool. In a way, this almost looks like as if she's praying, but with her arms backward, and it's going to be a very difficult thing to do with her arms backwards because there's quite a bit of problems when you intertwine the hands, and I think I'm going to change it up just a little bit. But also, as you move the hands back, the scapula and all the muscles at the back are going to be contracting, so they're going to be much fuller. You have to keep that in mind. One of the things that happens in a lot of beginning classes that I've seen is that artists will try and add hair right away in their sculptures. They don't really pay attention to the skull, they don't pay attention to the shape of the skull, and then they just add the hair. But for me, I've always found it to be useful to sculpt the shape of the head. And since this is going to be a quick sketch, I am not trying to make it an absolutely perfect head, but I do think you need to concentrate on the shape of the skull to make sure it's correct, and then add the hair on top of it. If you do it this way, the hair will land much better than you having to struggle and adding the skull shape afterwards. wanting some detail in the face, and I am trying to keep moving the torso up because it keeps sinking in because the clay is too wet. The hair has also got a lot of energy behind it, but I often think that maybe I need to make a few more changes in the gesture. Right now, this is what I would call a gesturally sculpture. There's not much happening. The hips are a little bit big, but I think I like the hips a little bit bigger. And also they give support to the sculpture. This is a pretty nice flowing sort of sculpture. It doesn't really look too much like the photograph up there, but I'm fine with that. One of the things I could do to make it a little bit more energetic is by dynamically changing a little bit of the pose, so I can slant the torso forward a little bit, as I did, just a little, and then this way. So if I turn it this way, she has more of a lean, and also her head is tilting up a little bit more and makes it a little bit more dramatic. So one of the issues I'm having near the legs is that this part keeps getting lost, and also when you bend your knees, a lot of the fat here is going to be developing, and this is going to be coming out a little bit more. And also the gastrocnemius muscle, since it's getting pinched here, you're going to have to add a little bit more mass here. And I do like to keep my bases flat, just because it gets a lot more attention to the figure. I do like it when you look at it from here. There is a curve to it that looks pretty cool. One of the things I'm struggling with, and I do like the lighting. I have one light set on the model. You can see that if I put my hand here, it hides it. But this way you can see the shadow shapes a little bit better. This way you can model the muscles. One thing that's happening is that my legs are a little bit too big for the torso, because one of the things that's happening that the clay is wet and there's no armature, so everything is kind of sinking down. And it's an interesting way of doing sculptures, but a lot of times in sculpture classes, you'll just do a lot of these croquis sort of sculptures that don't use armature, because a lot of people, they just take these sculptures and they fire them in a kiln. And this, since it's pretty small, you can see my hand in relation to the sculpture, you probably don't even have to dig inside of here. I probably would dig just the thigh because it's a little bit massive, but this could fire on its own. And I think that's one of the things I like about terracotta. Terracotta is like really nice to work with. Plasticine is a little bit almost robotic. And I see a lot of the sculptors online on YouTube using plasticine, and I have several other types of plasticine. They're a little bit more difficult to use than terracotta. Terracotta is almost like painting.